Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us again. Every Tuesday, we have a weekly update on the best and the state of art of everything that you need to know as a Hispanic leader about COVID-19, from a health update, business practices, what happens with economy, what are best practices also at the personal level, what do we need to know about small businesses through the lenses of the Small Business Administration represented by the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Welcome everybody. 40 minutes of the best information that you need so that you can take better decisions, so that you can inform your stakeholders. This is a weekly update on COVID-19, part of the Hispanic Response and Recovery Plan. I'm Claudia Romo Edelman, and I'm very glad to be back here after not being able to join you for personal reasons. My mother is hospitalized with COVID and intensive care with a ventilator, but now she's stable and allows me to be here. Excellent way to kick off this update with Dr. David Navarro, who's a special envoy for WHO, that again this morning, through an emergency, had to record a video for all of us about the state of art on health. What do we need to know as Hispanic leaders about health in this coronavirus pandemic time?
Hello and good day. I'm so pleased to have a chance once again to meet with the Hispanic community all over the world and to share with you my reflections on COVID-19 and the way in which it's changing our view of the world and also how we relate to each other. I'd like to start by just a few remarks about the virus. As I've said before, the virus is here to stay. It's not going away for the immediate future. And we're going to have to adapt our lives, the way we work, the way we socialize, so that we can live with the threat of COVID in our midst, whilst at the same time getting on with what we do as best we can. We can't go on freezing our existence by living in lockdowns in order to cope with the virus. These are terribly damaging for people's lives, for people's well-being, and for the fabric of our families and of our communities. So it's learning how to live with this virus that is the real focus of my work right now. Of course, there are still quite a lot of things that we do not know about this virus. How do we make sure that we know who has the virus and can then plan our strategies for containing the virus with the knowledge of where it is? The moment we rely on tests for the virus, and these can only be conducted by well-equipped laboratories. So having a clear idea of where the virus is very much affected by where testing is available. You hear all the time reports of new tests becoming onto the market. But I want to stress that not many of these tests are actually tests for the virus itself. Some of the new tests are tests to see whether or not the body has been exposed to the virus. They measure antibodies. And these antibody tests are only partially useful when it comes to identifying who has the disease. That means we have to learn to live with the COVID without necessarily knowing whether or not we have the virus. And that means we have to base what we do on whether or not we have symptoms of the disease. And these are symptoms, as you know, of respiratory infection. And then there's another set of questions. If you've had COVID, does that mean you are protected against having it again? With many diseases, having it once does protect you, but with other diseases, it doesn't. And that all depends on how good the body's immune response is to the virus. And so work is underway in many places to see whether or not people who've had COVID are possibly able to get it again. And there are some disturbing results which suggest that in some cases, people who have been treated are found to be reinfected. So you have to really, I think, be aware that there's going to be a lot more to be discovered about the virus. But that doesn't stop us learning to live with it. We all know that if you can maintain physical distancing, 6 feet apart from each other, or 2 meters if you prefer that way of measuring, is really helpful in reducing the risk of infection. We also know that if you can protect the people who are most at risk, older people or people with other diseases, that also reduces the severity of infection. And we know that if you find that there's somebody with COVID in your workplace or in your social circle, that supporting that person as they isolate from others is really critical to breaking transmission. A word to all of you about the work you're doing and the really heroic efforts you're making to help your communities and your societies get ahead of the virus. First of all, if you work in the care sector, if you're looking after people who are not well, you will be particularly worried about COVID. You'll be worried about those you care for getting the disease. And I think being very, very alert yourself as to whether or not you're exposing yourself to the risk of being infected by the disease is really important, as that will then determine whether or not you're likely to cause risk to other people. Secondly, if your work has you, for example, in the tourism sector, if you're working in support of hotels, or if part of your employment comes from looking after tourists, you'll be in a particular situation right now. But do please work with your employers as they think through how they themselves can reduce the risk of COVID to their guests. There's going to be a lot of work in the travel and tourism sector to try to provide safe experiences for people. And then if you're working in food, perhaps you're involved in actually growing food and the whole food production side, or perhaps you're involved in getting food to people who need it. Both ends are affected by COVID. The production side of food supplies are affected because farmers are finding it difficult to plant their fields and to harvest their crops and then get their crops to markets. Their markets are not working as they normally do. So there are real challenges for farmers. And secondly, we're seeing in many places that poor people are hungry because they can't get the food they need to eat. So we need to do everything possible to enable them to get nutritious food in particular. So wherever we are, whatever work we're doing, our employment is likely to be influenced by COVID. Perhaps nowhere more than in the health sector, where all the people who are working to care for people with disease have to also be very careful for their own health. They need to find protective equipment. They need to look after each other. They need to care for anxious patients. They're so important. And I'd just like to finish these remarks by acknowledging all of you in the wider Hispanic community who are working so hard to care for people who are sick. You're keeping hospitals and health centers going so they can treat people with diseases that are not due to COVID. And that is absolutely vital. We haven't all suddenly stopped being ill because of COVID. A lot of us are just not going to the doctors. And those of you who are working to keep health services going are so important. Secondly, many of you are caring for people with COVID. And I ask you at all times, please do what you can to protect yourselves from being infected and to prevent others from being infected if you are with the disease. Thank you for your hard work. Thank you for all your contributions. And most importantly, to all of you, thank you for what you are doing to help us get ready for living with COVID and being able to defend ourselves against the hardships caused by this virus. This is the next reality, the one that we're all coming into, and you are very important in ushering that in a safe way for everybody.
Well, thank you, Dr. David Navarro, the Special Envoy of the World Health Organization on COVID, my former boss, for this message. The next reality, how to live with the virus. We cannot live in a permanent lockdown because we will know that we have to actually live with this. He mentioned the antibody test, and that's something that resonates with a number of people. Hospitals are now denying doctors to be working if they have a fever or a cough. So antibody tests will be essential for them to be able to demonstrate that they had already COVID if they did, so that they can continue. So we will continue discovering more, as David said, but there are new norms of society, and Hispanics, as we know, we're disproportionately affected. And the sectors that David Navarro mentioned, food, care, health, we have 19 million Hispanics working in those essential functions, 1 million in food supply, 1 million in healthcare, 1 million in care. So we need to take that at home. And for that, I'm very pleased to open up the conversation for Jesus Manta, managing partner of IBM, a key partner of this initiative, Hispanic Response and Recovery Plan, from the very beginning, looking at how what the response of corporate America can be for this new reality. Jesus, please.
Yeah, I think it was perfect leading that Dr. David Navarro refocused the discussion from reaction, which is where we have been in the past, to now adaptation. I think there is more realization that what we call the return to work is not the same work or the same world that we left before. It's a new permanently changed world. And it presents a number of very special challenges. And I'll focus on three that I'm working on as part of IBM. One, it presents a challenge for governments. I'd say society in general, but is focused on governments in the sense of, we now have two human rights, or at least in most Western societies, two human rights that seem to be in opposition: the right to privacy and the right to live. And because the individual actions of people can actually result on a cascade set of effects that will take the right to live from another person, it presents an unusual dilemma in even governments that had a clear point of view on one side or the other, right? Whether the right of the community will trump the right to individual privacy, or the right to individual privacy is the fundamental block of democracy and therefore is immutable. There is a lot of technology solutions that can be implemented for example, contact tracing, which is one of the defense mechanisms. To the extent that we're not going to have a vaccine for a while, and to the extent that even the antibody tests that Dr. Navarro mentioned, they're not very reliable. We need yet to learn a lot about the antibody generation. Is all over the place on young versus old. So the titers, what is called those measures on how do you know is if a concentration of antibodies is over or below, or it creates immunity. There is much that we don't know. The only defense is then containment. And containment only works if you have a very effective, immediate way to do contact tracing and isolate a community. There is a technology solution that presents an ethical dilemma, which is if that technology solution invites privacy, then probably is more effective at contact tracing and containing this pandemic and any others. If it doesn't involve privacy, as some governments have said, well, we were going to use a solution that people can opt in. Only 20% of the population opts in. So by definition, the solution actually doesn't work. So big challenge to help governments figure out this equation and how to solve it. What is the right balance, privacy versus contact tracing? Second one is with the companies. And we obviously, that is what we spend a lot of our days doing, on how do we basically empower companies to adapt their supply chains, to adapt their systems, to adapt the way in which they engage clients, to protect themselves from the surge of bad actors using cybersecurity and the crisis to really penetrate defenses and do bad things. To that effect, next week, we have a big conference called Think, over 50,000 people, and everybody's invited and can register, ibm.com/think, where we're going to explore some of these solutions. What specifically are we putting in place to help companies adapt to this new normal? The third one is the one that I'm focused on right now and worries me the most, is this next world that we're going to be on. There is no question that is going to be more digital than the world that we were before. And therefore, the disparity on populations of having access to internet, of having access to digital skills can be enhanced as opposed to reduced. Education is the main defense. So one of the things that I'm personally sponsoring with IBM is making sure that we're going to have technology education in Spanish for free to any schools that will adopt our Pathway to Technology program. So we're calling it Open PTech. We're going to announce it next week, but it's really, really, really important that we make sure that the only defense that we're going to have when all of this is over is the skills of our Hispanic population. Some of them, they require that is in Spanish, and we're very committed to do that. And we welcome anybody with collaboration on how do we get this education to the broad Hispanic population to make sure that they're not left behind in this new world, because skills will be more digital, work will be more digital, and we need to make sure that we have a prepared population.
I love that. Thank you so much for breaking that news here. P-Tech is one of the the role models of of actually getting education through tech. For everybody now, having P-Tech in Spanish is essential. As you know, Jesus, 44% of Hispanics are in denial about COVID. Most of it, I think it is assumed to having brands not really targeting Hispanics or not doing it in language. And knowing that, for our population, the trust levels in tech have increased dramatically since COVID, is giving that access. So I thank you for that. I do think that adaptability will be very important. And we want to make sure that everybody from the Hispanic leaders that are here take that invitation for participating in thinkibm.com for two reasons. One is skill sets, regaining and upgrading your skill sets and knowledge about tech. And the number two is understand the new platform that IBM has deployed 1000% to have a conference that is for thousands and thousands of people virtually, so that we can start reimagining the way in which the world will be. If David Navarro is right, and this is here to stay, platforms like the one that you're deploying next week, Jesus, will be essential for us to understand how do we do a Davos online in the future. So thank you so much for that. I want to invite, everybody to join ibm.com/think, and looking forward, Jesus, to push forward the P-Tech in Spanish. I congratulate you and I celebrate you for doing that. We have a day of action that we're all of us trying to activate. Day of action, May 21, having every company, every ERG, employee resource group, and every individual and companies taking action for Hispanics that have been affected by COVID. May 21, so ideally we can deploy P-Tech on that occasion. Thank you, Jesus Mantas, Managing Partner of IBM. It's a great pleasure to welcome Gillian Tett. Gillian, dear friend, I love seeing you here, Gillian. Thank you so much. And dressed in blue like me, that's so awesome. The chair of the editorial board of the Financial Times, to give us our weekly update about the economy of the world. What is the state of art of the economy, and how can the Hispanic community be, aware of where things are, and what is the timeline and the spectrum for businesses to move forward and operate?
Well, good morning, Claudia. It's great to be back on the show. And I see we both got the blue memo this morning. But I love blue because you know what? It's the color of optimism, blue sky thinking, and blue sky suggesting there may be sunnier days ahead. And I guess the key message I want to really impart today, after listening to David, after listening to Jesus's very important words, is that when this virus first hit, there was a lot of discussion about whether we were heading for a V-shaped recovery, i.e. going sharply down and then sharply up, or a U-shaped recovery where we went down, stayed down for a bit and then came sharply up, or an L-shaped recovery where we went down and then stayed down. That was the so-called LUV, L-U-V, debate that a lot of economists were having. What is now increasingly becoming clear is that it's going to be more like a very long wiggly W, where as COVID is going to be with us for a long time in a medical sense, the economic impacts are sadly going to be with us for a long time too. And any recovery, when it does come, is going to be very uneven and not necessarily go in just one way. We may well be heading towards a world where we have some states, some industries open, others closed, where we have things open for a while and then forced to close again suddenly because there may be a second wave in the autumn or winter. We may be heading for a sector where essentially we have competence, returning for a while and then disappearing. And we may also be heading for a world where essentially the government provides support for a bit of time, provides some liquidity support, but does so in a potentially uneven and sometimes unpredictable way. So that is a potentially very unnerving message for many people to hear. The good news in all this is that businesses which are able to be flexible, resilient, creative, and adaptive, and accept this new reality for what it is, and not keep somehow hoping there will suddenly be a magical return to what we had before, no matter what is said in the press conferences each afternoon. The businesses who accept this reality and try and look for opportunity in it will certainly flourish. And the story of the stock market and the story of the earnings reports that we're hearing from big companies right now is that amid all this terrible gloom and terrible shock to the system, there are some companies which are actually finding ways to be adept and to not just survive, but seek out new opportunities. As you just heard from Jesus, it's going to be a new world that will involve a lot of tech, using tech imaginatively. It's going to be a world where even if we do start reopening, there will be a lot of measures in place still to ensure social distancing, which will require doing things rather differently. And it's going to be a world where, unfortunately, it's going to be tough to predict what's going to happen. But there is opportunity too. So I hope that we can combine both a mood of realism about the scale of economic pain and the numbers we're seeing in terms of unemployment, in terms of the growth decline or the severe recession are very, very alarming. I mean, nobody should be under any illusions about this. But within this pain, there is also opportunity as well. So I would just wish everyone who's looking right now for that the best of luck in finding it.
Gillian, thanks so much. I just want to ask a follow-up question. You've been talking about the shape, and it seems to me that you're talking about a prolonged W. What is the role of small businesses and entrepreneurs in being part of that curve? And how do you see that, for example, in places like Europe that are coming back, and then afterwards, you know, like we've seen already some other economies coming back slowly and opening slowly other things. And since Hispanics do, and Ramiro Cavazos is here, Hispanics do represent $700 billion, you know, like in sales through small businesses. And we have entrepreneurs like crazy, 86% of every single job since the Great Recession have been created by Hispanics. What's the role that we play, and how do you advise someone like Ramiro Cavazos that represents thousands of small businesses to play through this moment in time while the government is supporting?
Well, there's good news and bads here. On the one hand, as we've seen from the big scandals that have erupted over the first wave of assistance for small businesses, unfortunately, it has been the case that the bigger and better connected businesses have been first in line. That, to my mind, is morally wrong. We've tried as a newspaper to call this out repeatedly. We actually published a fantastic table showing which companies had got most of the small business assistance, and the numbers were pretty shocking for anybody who thought that the whole role of this program was to help small businesses. So the reality is that small businesses will face a tougher job getting access to finance within the current government programs. That does not mean that they should not try. They should be trying, lobbying out loudly and angrily to get the help they require. But that's bad news. The good news is that many people in the Hispanic community who are running small businesses are just one generation or most 2 generations away from operating in a climate which is in some ways more similar to what we are coping with today. There used to be this wonderful hard divide when I was working as a financial journalist initially a few years ago between so-called emerging market countries and developed world countries. And there was an assumption that emerging markets was a place where you had deeply unpredictable environments, where everything could change, where essentially it was very hard to necessarily see what the level of demand would be, and where actually everyone had to be super nimble and fleet of foot to survive and thrive. And developed markets, by contrast, were places where you could plug in the future and make predictions for the next 30 years with a spreadsheet and somehow presume that would play out. Well, newsflash, suddenly that divide has come crashing down. Reverse innovation, the idea of taking bright ideas from emerging markets to bring back into the developed world, is becoming all the rage, not just in the medical sphere, but many other spheres as well. And anybody who has experience surviving and thriving in utterly uncertain times, where actually local ties matter, where reverse innovation matters, where being creative matters, where essentially being optimistic in the face of extraordinary economic upheaval matters, anybody who has that experience in their family stands to have a huge advantage in today's world. And that is a story of many Hispanic communities who have often emigrated to America in a very brave way. And I would simply urge all of them to draw on their family history and their resources to really use their survival skills and their networks and their ability to turn on a dime and thrive in these environments, because you never know, you may find you're better place to do that than some of the bigger, stodgier and more complacent all-American rivals who've been here and living quietly for many years without having that challenge.
Yeah, yeah, I hope that is right. We've heard a number of times that Hispanics are disproportionately affected, but also might be disproportionately also equipped through their survival skills, through their resourcefulness, and just like by the fact that we're so fighters because we had to deal with so much in the past. Thank you, Gillian, Tett, for being with us.
Thank you.
And just to follow up what Gillian said, Lucia Alonzo, the Chief of Staff of Ferox Strategies on policy. Bring us the latest of policy, what's happening, what's available for Hispanics, and what do you react, Lucia, to what Gillian said about like having, like small businesses really not benefiting from the rights that were, like from those loans that were available on that package that was available for Hispanics because maybe bigger fish were faster and more connected than us to get them.
Thank you, Claudia and Gillian. Hi, everybody. I'm Lucia Alonzo with Ferox Strategies, stepping in for Christina Antello, our CEO, who's normally on these calls. But to answer your question, the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, was plagued with a lot of implementation issues. It was rolled out very quickly within 1 week of Congress creating the law, which is lightning speed for Congress. And there were a lot of launch day problems with the technology and the banks going down, the SBA technology itself going down, banks not being clear on the rules. So it's not quite clear, and Congress is investigating why some small businesses weren't able to immediately access the PPP as they were supposed to. One of the staffers who spoke to us on the Small Business Committee told us, well, don't attribute to malice what could be chalked up to incompetence. Unfortunately, that might be a factor here. But whatever the reasons, yes, there were delays. And then the demand was such on these private lenders who acted as the frontliners that the funding, they set aside $350 billion for this entire program. It ran out in less than 2 weeks, 13 days. So last week, Congress did re-up the program. They added further money, but now the question is, how fast will this round run out? They added another $321 billion, and they did set aside some this time that was supposed to go to banks in minority serving communities, in smaller banks, so not everything goes to the Banks of America, the Wells Fargo of the world. SBA also tried to pace the applications to ensure that the bigger banks can't submit thousands of applications at any given time, because that was what was going on. They capped these per lender, and they can now submit 350 applications per hour. And that might make things more equitable, but in the real world for the folks on this call, that might also mean you might have to wait longer for the banks to submit your application and for the SBA to process it. So again, there's these trade-offs where you tried to add equitability and accountability, and sometimes that can lead to you slowing down and getting your money. In terms of what else Congress is doing to aid small businesses, they are now that they've finished the PPP refund that I just referred to, they're now turning to what we're calling in DC Phase 4, or the Democrats are also calling it CARES 2, which is confusing, but Phase 4, CARES 2, they're the same thing. That is still very much up in the air. And in fact, the House, they were saying as recently as yesterday, the House Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, they were saying that we're going to have something ready to go by Friday. Since this call has started, they've come out and said, well, actually not. We're not coming back next week to do a vote on a bill because we're not ready. That is not good. I mean, obviously, businesses need this aid now, especially the small businesses. And again, if we're worried that the PPP is going to run out again, we want Congress to act more quickly. However, we are starting to get an idea of what might be in Phase 4. Again, Nancy Pelosi has said for the PPP, she wants to extend the life of the programs, because right now it is it's forgivable for everything you spend within 8 weeks on your payroll, your rent, your service debt, and things like that. She wants to extend that beyond that 8 weeks and make it available longer, which again could potentially benefit small businesses. The Democrats also, for individuals, and the White House is in agreement with them on this, the Democrats want to offer further direct aid. So for Americans who got a stimulus check, there is a lot of push among the House Democratic leadership, the committee leaders, Speaker Pelosi, and again, the White House just reaffirmed today that they also want to send direct aid to Americans. Now, again, that's a similar issue where they had rollout, and I know a lot of folks who are immigrants or mixed status families and things like that, there were issues there. I think that Democrats especially were very sensitive to that, and so they might try to address that in their phase 4. Something else that would be especially relevant to this group is there is talk in phase 4 of doing something with infrastructure, especially broadband. We've had several panelists talking about how this world, you know, we're all more remote now, and that might be a permanent change. We have distance learning from kids at home. We have telehealth. These might be permanent changes. And again, Congress on both sides is recognizing that. And so there is a bipartisan appetite for increased funding for broadband deployment to rural areas, to underserved urban areas that might not otherwise have it. What I'll finally leave you guys, your team with here, and I'm happy to take any questions, is again, there is the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. For the folks on this call have really been active. They are a very powerful part, again, of the House Democratic Caucus. They have pushed back against a lot of the recent immigration or executive order that President Trump put out that would bar a lot of green card issues and things like that. And they found an unlikely partner in business, because again, the business community is one of the folks that would like to bring in all sorts of either temporary or permanent immigrant labor to work in, for example, the tech industry. And so they're finding really a bipartisan support there. And so unfortunately, nothing really solid has come together, but that's something that for this community, especially to watch. And I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Thank you, Lucia. Lucia Alonzo, the Chief of Staff of First Strategies. I am looking forward to actually the reaction of Ramiro Cavazos, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce President. But before that, I do know that, you know, like there's a lot of injection. I do know that, you know, like again, organizations such as the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce are channeling this. Also, businesses have been massively affected, and I hear that you know, companies are getting governmental support for furloughs, 50% or whatever it is, for, you know, like the best practice, so that they can continue operating. And Umran Beba, it's a pleasure to have you here. Umran Beba is the Chief Global Diversity and Engagement Officer of PepsiCo company. I would love to, Umran, you've been at the forefront of doing and leading, you know, like business practice. Like, I would love for you to share what PepsiCo has done as a reaction for your employees, for your consumers, and for your community. Umran Beba, welcome.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and this is a great group with different perspectives. Thank you. So as you can imagine, being in the consumer goods, food and beverage, most of our workers, actually, they have been in the front lines, part of the essential workforce, except few countries. I should say India in the beginning, for example, did not allow that to happen, but most countries invited us to be part of the essential workforce. And in US specifically, they invited us to continue the food supply chain, beverage supply chain, because that was critical for the country. So therefore, our workforce has been in two groups: the front line, manufacturing, moving and selling, and the people, professionals who are working from home. The good news, I think we have seen that we can really work from home. So we were ready for that, because I think we had some of those practices and the technology. So now it's not anymore like, can we do it or not? I mean, it's kind of speeding up, it's happening. I will talk about that later, but for the frontline employees, that was our first, you know, focus area: safety, protective equipment, and also if they are sick, you know, the benefit adjustments, incentives, if they need to take care of loved ones, again, you know, adjustments for benefits, incentives, if they need to take care of their children. some specific payments for that, etc. So the whole package of, I think, taking care of the safety, but also the incentivizing our frontline employees was key. And meanwhile, interestingly, our sector, we had to hire people because some people were not able to work. Therefore, hiring was continuing, and I think we announced like 6,000 people a couple of weeks ago. And what we did, we approached some of our partners who are actually having difficulties with their employees, like, you know, from travel industry, from catering industry. So we also offer them jobs in terms of short-term, you know, temporary jobs. So that was very good. Our second focus was business continuity, our customers. So in terms of our channel mix, we have observed that large supermarkets still continue operating, of course. There was definitely a big challenge with the restaurants, hotels, you know, some of our business goes through those channels, but then an increase in the e-commerce. So we were expecting an e-commerce increase in general, but this is now happening, you know, because of the situation much faster. So we have to adapt ourselves, I think, going forward, but also we had to support our restaurant partners with different community campaigns. So moving into the communities, given that we are in the food business, you know, we focused on nutritious meals for kids, and we invested close to $50 million with different organizations around the globe to support, you know, nutritious meals and making sure kids especially get the meals because of the school closures, etc. In US, I think at least 15 million of this number, or 20 even, will be in the US. And at this point, I don't have the numbers, but I believe 60% of this money will go to the minorities, especially Black and Hispanic communities. But separately, we are working with our foundation and business to make sure that we work with some Hispanic and also African American organizations to make sure that we specifically support them actually throughout this crisis, not only in terms of meals, but in terms of supporting them to get jobs again if they lost their jobs, etc. So that work is going on, and I hope to have more news maybe in the next couple of weeks. But I think that community effort is critical, not only for the urgent food needs, but also how are we going to bring back the employment, the economy. And for our business, why is it important? Today, our first quarter earnings, just, you know, we had the release this morning, very good Q1. Most probably an impact on Q2 and some adjustments for the full year. But if the economy is not coming back, every sector will be impacted. So I think it's very important that we go back to work at some stage with all the safety, you know, measurements. And for the office workers, I believe we will not be in a rush. But our frontline will continue, and we will continue supporting them, thanking them, celebrating their successes. So. And within that, I should say we have a lot of Hispanic employees in the front lines, and we are proud of them, and we want to support them, you know, with every incentive, celebration, etc., because they do the heroic work. But thank you very much for the opportunity. I can answer other questions if needed.
And Umran, I am, you know, like I admire what PepsiCo has done. You have a leader that is a visionary, is committed to sustainability, is gonna put his, you know, like he's not.
Yes.
He's not drinking water and preaching water and drinking wine. He
Yes.
does what he says, and I love that. And I am really proud that we were able to use the marketplace that we set up as, you know, Hispanics are all of the Hispanic organizations together, and that you reached out to us saying, which are the Hispanic organizations that might benefit, that might need to be receiving this help that we have. Because remember, you know, Hispanics were not self-advocates naturally, so we're not part of the Feeding America programs naturally. So we have to, and thanks to the marketplace, we were able to match you with, you know, like USHCC, usually, for example, that are benefiting now. And it's very good to see how, you know, like this collaboration can help. And ideally, when you need to hire people in short-term or temporary jobs, you can reach out to us so that we can make that matchmaking. And I invite PepsiCo again, the way that I invited IBM and others, so that we can take a day of action and invite all your employee resource groups to take one day to do one thing for Hispanics, either donate time, donate money for the different organizations that are doing great job. If someone wants to donate time to speak to someone that is lonely, if someone wants to donate food, we can do it through that. So Umran, Beba, thank you so much for what you're doing. Thank you so much for being with us today. And last but not least, our very expected statements from Ramiro Cavazos, the president of the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, representing thousands of small businesses in America. Ramiro, please take it along. Let's close hard with you.
No, thank you, Claudia. We have so much respect for the work you're doing to convene these gatherings, and thank you to the panel members for your insightful comments. To many of you, it's great to see you again. You all know that small business is big business around the world, especially in the United States. And it's very important that we realize that the folks on the front lines that Umran was talking about, many of those are part of the 60 million Latinos that live in our country. 1 out of every 5 to 6 people doing construction, harvesting our food. And many of those also, as you said, Claudia, 1 million people just in the healthcare industry. We should not take for granted, nor should we take for granted the needs of many of our small businesses who, quite frankly, saved us from the last recession from 10 years ago. The recovery came from small business, not from big business. And the other half of the recovery came from people doing exporting and trading around the world. We have been busy working at the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, representing our 4.5 million Hispanic-owned businesses, who 1 out of every 4 are already temporarily closed. Our desire is to make sure that we provide them the liquidity that, as you all have said already, they have not had access to. The funding in the Paycheck Protection Program has not gone to the small businesses that had the greatest need. It's very clear. And so for us, yesterday, the Small Business Administration resumed accepting loan applications from participating lenders. As Lucia said, and many of the folks know, that the initial round of $350 billion in Paycheck Protection Program that was supposed to save our businesses and keep our workforce in place was spent very quickly. The second round of $310 billion of the second tranche of Paycheck Protection Program was enhanced by $60 billion additional dollars for the economic injury disaster loans, but an additional $30 billion, Claudia, to help minority depository institutions and also community development financial institutions. So clearly this Congress, and we've been working in a bipartisan way with Republicans and Democrats, know that this funding is going to go quickly. In fact, yesterday at 3:30 p.m., more than 100,000 Paycheck Protection Program loans had already been awarded by 4,000 different lenders. The other additional impact on this lending that will also go very quickly is that there were 1.7 million small businesses whose applications were in the queue at banks that no funding was available during the first round. So I feel that after the second round of funding, and we hope that it reaches more of our Hispanic and minority-owned businesses, that, and especially those that did not have a banking relationship. Claudia, as you know, only 1 out of every 2 of our businesses have a banking relationship. So this second round is meant to help those. We believe that there will need to be a third round of funding for our small businesses. They are on the front lines. They are also going to, as Jesus mentioned, through digital, and as Umran has said, find a new way of working and working in an environment that is completely changed. We're never going back to the way we worked or lived. We will move forward and find our way by adapting and using innovation. I'd like to just conclude by sharing that it's very important that we also realize that we are in a recession. Recessions typically last 15 to 18 months. So we are not going to begin to see ourselves recover from this at the earliest until December of 2021. So we at the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, representing our board, are very actively engaged in making sure that we save our small businesses. I'll stop there, Claudia, if anyone has any questions.
Well, unfortunately, we cannot open it for questions except on the chat, except that I do want to ask you, from all those billions of dollars that have been deployed and made available, how many Hispanics have benefited from the 4.5 small businesses that you represent?
Claudia, we are attempting to have the SBA track the data in that manner. Right now, they're only tracking by industry category, by the size of the loan, and by the states that are being awarded these loans. We have asked them to track it by women-owned businesses, Hispanic, Asian, African-American businesses. That data, I'm sure, is easy to share, but that is one of the things we're working with both parties to make sure that we track the data and that we show how many of those dollars are going to our businesses. All we know right now is anecdotal information by people who said, I applied for the PPP, I did receive it. The challenge though, Claudia, is even with a PPP, some workers are having to stay home and care for their children who are homeschooling. At the same time, the businesses, they may have a paycheck to go back to, but those businesses are partially closed, especially if they're in the food industry where their business has decreased. So we're in a catch-22 with the PPP. Even if it's awarded to a business, their employees may be actually making more money as on the unemployment insurance or by staying home, also with the dilemma of providing education to their middle school kids or younger kids who they don't have money to fund childcare or also homeschooling, but then also because of the COVID, they can't bring in somebody from the outside to manage. Yeah. So anyway, a big dilemma, Claudia, but we're trying to get that data from the Small Business Administration.
And we will continue every week to track down how is it, and if there's any need that the Hispanic leadership should get together to advocate together for, you know, like for either more transparency or better access or more positive action toward Hispanics, that we know we're not, you know, like we're only 44% of small businesses to start with ask for financial support even if they need it, and only 28% of them get it. Therefore, we need to be asking more, and we need to be asking more together. I want to thank everybody for being here on these 45 minutes of an update every week on COVID-19, so that our Hispanic leadership can be united in one set of, you know, like united and informed to take better decisions and to share the information with the larger community. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Dr. David Navarro, Jesus Mantas, Gillian, Tett, Lucia, Alonzo, Umran, Beba, and Ramiro, Cavazos. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. See you next week. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.